and your body's energetic realignment. Listen, before you decide whether you agree or disagree with what I'm about to say, I want you to notice something first. Notice your breathing. Not how it should be, not how you want it to be, how it actually is. Shallow or deep, fast or slow, smooth or slightly strained. Most people have never paid attention to this. And yet this single detail reveals more about your inner state than most conversations ever will, because the body does not lie. It adapts. It compensates. It remembers. And right now, many human bodies are carrying a quiet memory, a memory of being out of sync. You may not call it that. You may call it stress, burnout, restlessness, anxiety. But beneath every modern label is the same ancient experience, disalignment. And here's the unsettling part. The universe you live in is not disaligned. It is ordered to a degree that is almost frightening. Stars do not collide randomly. Planets do not drift aimlessly. Seasons do not forget when to arrive. Creation follows rules so precise that even chaos has boundaries. And yet, human beings who live inside this perfectly ordered system often feel internally fragmented, always rushing, always tense, always searching. That contradiction should bother you, because if the universe is ordered, and you are part of the universe, then disorder is not your natural state. So what happened? For a very long time, humanity believed the answer was moral. You sinned. You failed. You lacked discipline. You lacked faith. But what if the answer is structural instead? What if the issue is not belief, but alignment? Because when you look at creation closely, without theology, without philosophy, without fear, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Nothing in existence is random. Not the spiral of a galaxy, not the branching of a tree, not the structure of a snowflake, not the rhythm of a heartbeat. There is pattern beneath everything. And pattern is not opinion. Pattern is evidence. Long before modern science existed, human beings observed this. They didn't have advanced instruments, but they had attention. They watched how shells unfolded in spirals, how flowers arranged their petals, how storms rotated instead of scattering. They noticed repetition, consistency, order, and they gave that order a name: geometry. Not geometry as calculation, but geometry as language, a language creation uses to remain coherent. This is what later generations would call sacred geometry, not because it was mystical, but because it was foundational. These patterns were not invented by humans. They were discovered. And here is where the story becomes personal, because those same patterns exist inside you. Your body is not an accident of biology. It is an organized system. Your spine forms a central axis, supporting balance and orientation. Your breath moves in cycles, inhaling and exhaling in rhythm. Your heart beats in waves, steady, measured, sustaining life. Your nervous system communicates through signals and frequency, not randomness. This is not poetic language. It is observable design. And design always implies intention. When ancient texts say you were fearfully and wonderfully made, they are not offering comfort. They are describing structure. But structure only functions when it is respected. And modern life does not respect structure. We sit for hours, collapsing the spine. We breathe shallow, starving the body of oxygen. We overstimulate the mind while neglecting the nervous system. Speed replaces rhythm. Noise replaces stillness. Distraction replaces presence. And slowly, almost invisibly, alignment erodes. This is why silence feels uncomfortable now, why rest feels unproductive, why stillness feels unsettling. Your system has adapted to constant input. It no longer remembers how to settle. But here's the quiet truth. Your body has never stopped trying to return to order. Every sigh is an attempt. Every stretch is an attempt. Every moment you pause without knowing why is an attempt. Alignment is not something you create. It is something you allow. When posture realigns, breath deepens. When breath deepens, the nervous system calms. When the nervous system calms, attention stabilizes. And when attention stabilizes, clarity emerges. Not excitement, not stimulation. Peace. Peace is not emotional pleasure. Peace is coherence. This is why the most profound spiritual moments are rarely loud. They happen in stillness. A whisper, a pause, a moment of deep presence. Because stillness allows alignment, and alignment allows truth to be felt instead of forced. This is where many people misunderstand sacred geometry. It is not power. It is not ritual. It is not something to activate. It is recognition, a recognition of the order that already exists. Sacred geometry does not replace faith. It explains why faith feels stable when the body is aligned and fragile when it is not. Because belief rests on structure, and structure rests on coherence. The same intelligence that holds galaxies in place holds you together. The same order that sustains the cosmos is written into your body. You were never meant to live fragmented. You were never meant to live scattered. You were never meant to be at war with yourself. And the reason this truth feels unfamiliar is because forgetting became normal. But forgetting does not erase design. It only delays remembrance. And remembrance, when it finally arrives, feels like coming home. We are only at the beginning. Most people believe misalignment begins in the mind. They think it starts with thoughts, negative thinking, doubt, confusion, lack of motivation. But that belief is backwards. Misalignment begins in the body, long before the mind ever tries to explain it. The body is the first place order is lost, and the last place order is restored. Think about it. Before you feel anxious, your breath changes. Before you feel overwhelmed, your posture collapses. Before you feel disconnected from God, your attention fractures. The body reacts first. The mind follows later with stories. And because modern culture taught us to ignore the body, we try to solve physical disalignment with mental effort. We think our way out of tension. We motivate our way out of exhaustion. We pray our way out of unrest without ever asking whether our inner structure is capable of receiving peace. This is not a failure of faith. It is a misunderstanding of design, because faith was never meant to exist in a fragmented vessel. Faith assumes coherence. That is why belief feels effortless at some moments and heavy at others. The belief didn't change. The structure did. Ancient wisdom understood this intuitively. They did not separate the body, the mind, and the spirit into competing systems. They saw them as one continuous field. When the field was coherent, life flowed. When the field was disrupted, suffering appeared. Not as punishment, as consequence. This is why alignment was never taught as a dramatic event. It was taught as a way of living, standing upright, breathing deeply, moving rhythmically, resting intentionally. Not because these actions were sacred rituals, but because they preserved order. Order sustains life. Disorder drains it. Modern life reverses this entirely. We reward speed over rhythm, urgency over presence, productivity over coherence. We glorify exhaustion and call it purpose. And then we wonder why people feel spiritually empty. But emptiness is not the absence of meaning. It is the absence of structure. You cannot pour depth into a scattered system. This is why so many people chase experiences. They want intensity to replace coherence. But intensity fades. coherence remains. Here is a truth that feels almost too simple to be accepted. Your body is the doorway back to order. Not through obsession, not through control. Through awareness. When awareness returns to the body, rhythm returns. When rhythm returns, the nervous system settles. When the nervous system settles, perception changes. And when perception changes, faith no longer feels forced. It feels natural. This is why stillness is threatening. To a misaligned system, stillness removes distraction. It reveals imbalance. An imbalance is uncomfortable until it is resolved. So the mind resists. It fills silence with noise. It fills rest with stimulation. It fills emptiness with scrolling. Not because silence is dangerous, but because silence tells the truth. And truth requires adjustment. This is why sacred geometry matters, not as knowledge, but as a reminder. Geometry shows us what alignment looks like. Symmetry, balance, proportion, not perfection, relationship. When one part pulls too far, the whole system compensates. Eventually, it cannot. This is not mystical language. This is how bridges collapse, how ecosystems fail, how bodies break down. And yet, the design always knows how to return, given the chance. Your body does not need instructions. It needs conditions. Conditions of stillness. Conditions of rhythm. Conditions of respect. When those conditions exist, alignment begins naturally. And alignment feels like relief, not excitement, not adrenaline. Relief, the kind you feel when you finally exhale. After holding your breath too long, this is why real peace feels quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It settles. And when peace settles, something surprising happens. Your relationship with God changes. Not because God changed, but because your capacity to receive clarity expanded. Prayer becomes less verbal. Faith becomes less argumentative. Trust becomes less performative. You stop trying to convince yourself and start allowing yourself. This is where many people misunderstand spirituality. They think growth means becoming more intense, more disciplined, more driven, more focused. But growth often means becoming more coherent, less scattered, less reactive, less strained. Coherence is strength, without tension. And this is where the final misunderstanding dissolves. Sacred geometry does not teach you how to control energy. It teaches you how to stop fighting order. It shows you. That alignment was never meant to be earned. It was meant to be remembered because you were designed within a universe that already knows how to be whole. The same order that holds the stars is available in your breath. The same balance that sustains galaxies exists in your posture. The same rhythm that moves oceans moves through your heartbeat. You are never separate from creation. You are shaped by it. And when you live against that shape, life feels heavy. When you live with it, life feels grounded. Not easy, not painless, but stable. This is the truth most people never hear. Peace is not a reward. Peace is alignment. And alignment begins the moment you stop running from stillness and allow your system to remember its design. And as alignment begins to return, something subtle but profound starts to happen. You notice space, not empty space, but inner space. Moments between thoughts, pauses between reactions, breaths that feel fuller, slower, unforced. At first, this space feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because the mind has grown used to filling every gap. Noise became protection. Activity became identity. Stillness feels like doing nothing. But in reality, stillness is where order reorganizes itself. Think of water after a storm. When the wind stops, the surface doesn't become calm instantly. Waves continue for a while. Ripples overlap. Currents settle slowly. The water was never broken. It was disturbed. And disturbance always takes time to resolve. The same is true for you. Alignment is not instant because misalignment wasn't instant either. It happened over years of rushing, bracing, tightening, ignoring. So when stillness arrives, the body begins to unwind in layers. Muscles release memories they were never meant to carry. Breath reaches places it hasn't reached in years. The nervous system relearns what safety feels like, and the mind, so used to controlling, begins to observe instead. This is where many people panic, because control feels like safety, when alignment has been absent for too long. So when the system starts to settle, the mind asks questions. What am I supposed to do now? Why do I feel exposed? Why does this feel unfamiliar? But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. It means new, or, more accurately, remembered. This is where ancient wisdom and modern understanding quietly meet. Not in ideology, not in debate, in experience. When the body returns to rhythm, the mind stops racing to protect itself. When the mind stops racing, perception sharpens. You begin to see what was always there, but impossible to notice while scattered. Pattern, connections, order, not imposed from outside, revealed from within. This is why sacred geometry was never about complexity. It was about simplicity. The simplest shapes create the strongest structures. The simplest rhythms sustain the longest movements. Complexity arises from order, not the other way around. Modern spirituality often forgets this. It adds layers instead of removing them. It seeks intensity instead of coherence. It chases experiences instead of stability. But truth is stable. Truth does not require constant reinforcement. It holds. And when your inner structure begins to hold, faith no longer feels like something you perform. It feels like something you rest in. This is when prayer changes. Words become pure. Silence becomes richer. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally have something to listen with. This is where many people misunderstand God. They expect him to speak louder when they feel lost. But what if the volume was never the issue? What if clarity was blocked? Not by distance, but by noise. When the system is coherent, truth doesn't need to shout. It resonates, like a tuning fork, struck gently in a quiet room. This is why alignment affects faith, without ever touching belief. Belief is conceptual. Alignment is experiential. And experience shapes trust, far more deeply than argument ever could. This is also why forcing belief often fails. You cannot think your way into coherence. You must allow your system to return to order. And order always begins with attention. Attention to posture. Attention to breath. Attention to stillness. Not as obsession. As respect. Respect for the design you inhabit every day. The design that carried you. Through every moment of survival, you never consciously controlled. Your heart did not ask permission to beat. Your lungs did not wait for belief to breathe. Your body has always trusted the order it was given. It is only the mind that learned to doubt it. And when the mind relaxes its grip, trust returns naturally. This is why alignment feels like relief, rather than achievement. You are not adding something. You are releasing what never belonged. And as that release continues, another realization emerges. Many of the struggles we label as spiritual are actually structural. Not moral failures. Not lack of devotion. Fatigue that makes faith feel heavy. Tension that makes prayer feel distant. Restlessness that makes silence unbearable. These are not signs of spiritual weakness. They are signs of nervous systems that have been overworked and undernourished by stillness. This understanding changes how you see yourself. Compassion replaces judgment. Patience replaces urgency. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What does my system need to return to order?" That single shift opens a door most people never find. Because once alignment is restored, life does not become easier. It becomes clearer. And clarity is far more powerful than comfort. Clarity shows you where effort is wasted. where resistance is unnecessary, where faith was never meant to struggle. This is when the final truth begins to surface. Sacred geometry is not teaching you something new. It is reminding you of something ancient, that you were designed to live in harmony with creation, not in conflict with it. That order is not restrictive. It is supportive. That stillness is not emptiness. It is intelligence at rest, and that God's presence was never distant. It was obscured by misalignment. As coherence returns, so does awareness. And awareness changes everything. And as awareness deepens, something even more unexpected unfolds. You begin to notice how often your life has been lived in reaction, reacting to pressure, reacting to expectations, reacting to fear you never consciously chose. Reaction tightens the system. It pulls the body forward, shortens the breath, sharpens the mind. Alignment does the opposite. Alignment creates response instead of reaction. A pause appears, small at first, between what happens and how you move within it. That pause is not weakness. It is stability. This is why alignment feels unfamiliar to a world addicted to urgency. Urgency thrives on imbalance. It feeds on tension. It convinces you that speed is strength. But speed without coherence is fragile. Order does not rush. It holds. This is how creation operates. Stars do not hurry to burn brighter. Oceans do not rush to reach the shore. Trees do not strain to grow taller overnight. They expand according to rhythm. When humans live outside rhythm, life begins to feel like effort. Not meaningful effort, constant effort. The kind that drains rather than builds. And here is a truth that may unsettle you. Many people believe they are tired because they are doing too much. But often, they are tired because they are doing too much. Out of alignment. When effort moves against design, energy leaks. When effort moves with design, energy circulates. This is not mystical thinking. This is how systems function. A wheel spins smoothly when centered. Off-center, it wobbles and wears itself down. Your life is no different. This is why alignment changes not only how you feel, but how you live. Decisions become clearer. Boundaries feel more natural. You stop forcing paths that were never meant to carry you. And faith. Faith stops feeling like something you must constantly defend, because coherence does not argue for its existence. It simply works. This is where many people encounter a quiet shock. They realize how much of their spiritual struggle was actually physical tension, how much doubt was nervous exhaustion, how much confusion was lack of grounding. And when the body settles, the mind follows. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily, like sediment sinking to the bottom of clear water. Thoughts slow. Perspective widens. You begin to see beyond urgency. This is when faith matures, not into certainty, but into steadiness. A steadiness that does not panic when answers are delayed. A steadiness that does not collapse when silence appears, because silence is no longer empty. It is spacious, and space allows truth to echo. This is why sacred geometry was always associated with temples, cathedrals, and sacred spaces, not because shapes were holy, but because proportion created coherence. High ceilings lifted the breath. Symmetry calmed the nervous system. Light followed deliberate patterns. These spaces were not designed to impress. They were designed to align, and alignment opens perception. When perception opens, meaning reveals itself without force. This is why modern spaces exhaust us. They are efficient, but incoherent. Bright, but overwhelming. Functional, but hostile to stillness. We have optimized productivity at the cost of presence. And then we wonder why people feel spiritually empty. But emptiness is not absence of God. It is absence of coherence. You can hear subtle truth in a system trained for noise. This brings us to the most misunderstood idea of all. Alignment does not remove struggle. It removes unnecessary resistance. Life still challenges. Loss still comes. Uncertainty still exists. But the system no longer collapses under weight. It bends. It adapts. It recovers. This is resilience, not as toughness, but as coherence under pressure. And resilience is deeply spiritual, because it mirrors how creation survives. Storms do not destroy oceans. They pass through them. Fire does not erase forests forever. New growth follows. Life continues. Because structure allows recovery. This is the quiet promise written into design. You are not built to avoid difficulty. You are built to withstand it, but only when aligned. This is why returning to order feels like returning to truth, not intellectual truth. Embodied truth, the kind you feel in your chest before you can explain it, the kind that settles your breath before it convinces your thoughts. And this is where the story reaches a turning point. Because once alignment returns, you begin to see how much of modern fear is manufactured by disconnection. Fear thrives in fragmented systems. It weakens coherence. It demands urgency. Alignment dissolves fear, not by fighting it, but by stabilizing the system that fear feeds on. This is why peace feels powerful, not because it dominates, but because it does not collapse. And when peace becomes your ground, you stop chasing certainty. You begin to trust process, trust timing, trust silence, because silence is no longer threatening. It is where alignment speaks. And alignment speaks quietly, always has. And when silence finally stops feeling like a void, you begin to understand something most people never reach. Silence was never empty. It was crowded with signals you couldn't hear while your system was scattered. This is why alignment feels like revelation, even though nothing new was added. Nothing arrived from outside. Nothing descended. What changed was reception. A radio doesn't need a stronger signal when the static disappears. It needs tuning. And tuning is what alignment does. It refines perception. This is why truth often feels obvious after you see it, and impossible before you do. Because the problem was never intelligence. It was interference. Interference created by tension, by urgency, by constant self-correction. The body learns to brace. The mind learns to anticipate threat. The spirit learns to stay alert. All useful for survival. All destructive for coherence. And once survival becomes the default mode, even peace feels suspicious. This is why some people feel uneasy when things finally slow down. The system has learned to equate calm with danger, so it waits for something to go wrong. Alignment gently undoes that conditioning, not through force, through repetition, breath after breath, moment after moment, until the nervous system learns a new truth. Stillness is safe, and safety changes everything. When safety is present, the body releases its grip. When the body releases, the mind no longer needs to dominate. And when the mind relaxes, faith stops being defensive. This is where belief transforms, not into blind certainty, but into grounded trust. Trust that does not panic when answers are delayed. Trust that does not fracture when silence stretches. Trust that does not demand proof at every step. Because trust rooted in coherence does not depend on constant reassurance. This is the faith that survives storms, not because it is loud, but because it is stable. This is why sacred geometry has always been misunderstood. People thought it was about hidden knowledge. It was never about secrets. It was about structure. Structure is not glamorous. It doesn't excite the ego, but it holds under pressure. And everything that lasts is held by structure. Civilizations fall when structure collapses. Bodies break down when structure is ignored. Faith crumbles when it has nothing stable to rest on. This is not punishment. It is physics. It is design. And design does not judge. It responds. Responds to alignment with flow. Responds to misalignment with friction. The friction you feel in life is not a sign you're on the wrong path. Often, it is a sign you're moving against rhythm. This understanding changes how you approach struggle. You stop asking, how do I push through this? And start asking, where am I resisting order? Sometimes the answer is obvious. You're forcing a pace your body cannot sustain. You're holding tension you no longer need. You're living in anticipation instead of presence. Sometimes the answer is subtle. A posture you've collapsed into for years. A breath pattern shaped by anxiety. A constant mental scanning for problems. These things feel small. But small misalignments create large consequences over time. This is why alignment is quiet work. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. And one day you realize something remarkable. Life feels less heavy, not because circumstances changed, but because resistance decreased. You are still carrying responsibility, still facing uncertainty, still navigating complexity, but the load feels different, balanced, like weight distributed properly, instead of pressing on one fragile point. This is coherence. And coherence restores dignity. You stop feeling like life is happening to you. You feel like you are moving with it. This is when gratitude stops being forced. It arises naturally. Because tension is no longer consuming all your attention. You notice beauty again. Small things. Light through a window. The rhythm of walking. The quiet strength of breath. These moments were always there. But misalignment made them invisible. This is also when your relationship with God deepens, without effort. Not because you became more religious, but because you became more present. Presence is the doorway through which meaning enters. This is why scriptures speak so often about waiting, stillness, and rest, not as punishment, not as inactivity, but as alignment. Be still was never a command to stop living. It was an invitation to return to order. And order allows life to flow, without constant strain. This is the truth hidden in plain sight. Sacred geometry is not about shapes. It is about how life holds together. And when you honor that, in your posture, your breath, your rhythm, you honor the intelligence that designed you, not by worshiping form, but by living in harmony with it. This is the kind of faith that does not fracture under pressure. This is the kind of peace that does not evaporate when noise returns. And this is why alignment is not a destination. It is a relationship, a daily return, a quiet remembering. And as this quiet remembering settles in, you begin to notice how deeply it reshapes your sense of identity. Not the identity built from labels, roles, or achievements, but the one that exists beneath all of that. The one that was present before expectations taught you. Who you were supposed to be. Misalignment fractures identity. It pulls you in different directions at once. One part of you wants rest. Another demands performance. One longs for meaning. Another fears slowing down. This inner conflict feels like confusion, but it is really fragmentation. Alignment resolves this not by choosing one voice over another, but by restoring hierarchy. The body stabilizes first. The breath follows. The nervous system settles. Then the mind regains clarity. Only after this does identity feel unified again. This is why so many people feel lost, even when life appears successful. They built an identity on effort, while their structure was collapsing underneath. Alignment does not erase ambition. It grounds it. You still move forward, but no longer at war with yourself. And when inner conflict quiets, you notice something unexpected. Your intuition sharpens. Not intuition as impulse, but as coherence, sensing coherence. You begin to feel when something is off or before it becomes obvious. You sense when a decision pulls you out of rhythm. You recognize when a path demands constant resistance. This is not superstition. It is sensitivity restored. A tuned system detects imbalance quickly. This is how the body protects itself. This is how creation maintains order. And this is why alignment often feels like wisdom, rather than knowledge. Knowledge accumulates information. Wisdom recognizes patterns. Sacred geometry is always about pattern recognition, the ability to see relationship, isolated parts. This is why it connects so deeply with spiritual understanding. Faith itself is a pattern. Trust repeated over time. Obedience aligned with purpose. Stillness making space for guidance. When these patterns are broken, faith feels strained. When they are restored, faith feels natural. This is why alignment does not require belief to begin. It precedes belief. A child trusts before it understands. A body relaxes before the mind explains. Order is recognized instinctively. This is also why fear loses its grip as coherence strengthens. Fear feeds on fragmentation. It isolates sensations. It amplifies uncertainty. It narrows perception. Alignment widens perception. You see context. You see timing. You see proportion. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable. Not because it shrank, but because you stabilized. This is resilience in its truest form. Not toughness, not suppression. Stability under load. And stability allows compassion to grow. When your system is no longer in survival mode, you stop projecting tension outward. You listen more. You react less. You judge less harshly. Not because you try to be kinder, but because your inner environment is no longer hostile. This is how alignment quietly heals relationships. Not by fixing others, by stabilizing yourself. Coherence spreads. It is contagious. Just as tension spreads. Just as fear spreads. Peace spreads too. This is why one aligned person can calm an entire room. Not by words, by presence. Presence carries information. And presence comes from alignment. This is the truth hidden beneath the surface of every spiritual tradition. Transformation does not begin with belief. It begins with structure. And structure is shaped by rhythm, proportion, and stillness. This is why sacred spaces feel different. Not because they are holy by location, but because they are designed for coherence. They slow the breath. They lift the posture. They quiet the nervous system. In that environment, truth becomes audible, not louder, clearer. Modern life rarely offers this. So alignment becomes a personal responsibility, a daily return to rhythm, not perfection, not discipline, awareness, awareness of breath, awareness of posture, awareness of tension. These are not small things. They are the foundation of coherence. And coherence is the soil in which faith takes root. Without it, belief dries out. With it, belief grows effortlessly. This is why alignment feels like coming home, to something you never consciously left. Because at the deepest level, your system remembers. It remembers order. It remembers rhythm. It remembers stillness. And when you allow that remembrance to guide you, life begins to move differently. Not faster, not slower, truer. This is not the end of the story. It is the turning point. Because once alignment is restored, the question is no longer, how do I fix myself? The question becomes, how do I live in a way that honors the design I was given? And the answer to that question changes everything. And when that question takes root, how do I live in a way that honors the design I was given? Life stops feeling like a problem to solve and starts feeling like a pattern to align with. This is where urgency finally loosens its grip. Realize you don't need to outrun life. To make it meaningful, you don't need to prove your worth through exhaustion. You don't need to fill every moment with motion. You begin to sense timing, when to act, when to wait, when to rest without guilt. Timing is not indecision. It is intelligence expressed through patience. This is how creation moves. Seeds do not grow faster because they are pressured. They grow when conditions are right. Alignment teaches you to recognize those conditions. Within yourself, you stop forcing clarity and start creating the environment where clarity emerges. And here is where something quietly radical happens. Your relationship with effort changes. Effort no longer feels like strain. It feels directed. You still work. You still commit. You still move forward. But the movement feels supported, rather than resisted, like rowing with the current, instead of against it. This is why alignment restores energy, without adding motivation. Motivation burns fuel. Alignment conserves it. This is also why aligned people often seem calm under pressure, not because they feel nothing, but because their system is not leaking energy through tension. Pressure passes through them, instead of lodging inside them. This is the difference between stress and load. Stress accumulates. Load distributes. Alignment distributes load. And when load is distributed properly, you discover a surprising truth. You can carry more by trying less. This is not laziness. It is efficiency born of coherence. And coherence changes how you experience difficulty. Challenges no longer feel personal. They feel contextual. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this asking of me? That shift alone restores dignity. You are no longer a victim of circumstances. You are a participant in pattern. And participation brings responsibility, not blame. Responsibility to remain aligned, even when conditions change. Because misalignment often returns quietly, through subtle habits, through overlooked tension, through neglect of stillness. Alignment is not maintained by intensity. It is maintained by attention. Small, consistent attention to how you sit, to how you breathe, to how you react. These moments seem insignificant until you realize they shape your entire inner climate. This is why alignment is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with fireworks. It shows up as steadiness, as clarity, as the absence of unnecessary struggle. And steadiness is what allows faith to deepen without becoming rigid. Rigid faith fractures under pressure. Flexible faith, faith supported by coherence, adapts without losing its center. This is the faith that survives doubt, without collapsing. Because doubt, like tension, needs instability to dominate. Alignment weakens its grip, not by silencing questions, but by grounding the one who asks them. This is why aligned people can sit with uncertainty without panic. They trust process, because their system has experienced order returning, again and again. They know chaos is temporary. Order is foundational, and this trust extends outward. You become less reactive in relationships, less defensive in conversations, less threatened by difference, because your sense of self is no longer fragile. It is anchored. Anchored not in opinion, but in coherence. This is how alignment becomes quietly transformative. Not by changing the world overnight, but by changing how you move through it. And the world responds, not magically, naturally. Calm invites calm. Presence invites honesty. Stability invites trust. You become a reference point, not because you demand authority, but because coherence communicates safety. This is why alignment is never just personal. It ripples. It influences spaces, relationships, environments. One aligned nervous system can stabilize many others. This is not metaphor. It is biology. And biology is one of the languages through which design expresses itself. Which brings us to a final, often overlooked truth. Sacred geometry is not separate from daily life. It is not hidden in symbols or diagrams. It is alive in how you stand, how you breathe, how you pause, how you move through time. It is present whenever proportion is restored, whenever rhythm is respected, whenever stillness is allowed. And when you live this way, not perfectly, but attentively, something profound settles in. You stop feeling like you are chasing meaning. Meaning meets you in the middle of ordinary moments. Because meaning was never distant. It was waiting for coherence, to make space for it. This is quiet power of alignment. Not control, not domination. Harmony. And harmony does not shout. It resonates. And when it does, you recognize it immediately, because something in you remembers. And when that resonance becomes familiar, you start to recognize it everywhere. not as a concept, but as a feeling of rightness. You feel it when a decision settles instead of churns. You feel it when a conversation ends without regret. You feel it when your body moves through a day without the constant background tension you once accepted as normal. This is when you realize something quietly astonishing. Alignment doesn't make life perfect. It makes life honest. Honest about limits. Honest about timing. Honest about what truly belongs to you and what you've been carrying unnecessarily. You begin to notice how often misalignment shows up as overcommitment, saying yes when the body is already signaling no, pushing forward when breath is shallow and posture is strained, mistaking endurance for purpose. Alignment restores discernment, not moral discernment, somatic discernment. The ability to sense when something is sustainable and when it is not. This is why alignment feels like wisdom, long before it feels spiritual, because wisdom is not information. Wisdom is proportion, knowing how much effort fits the moment, knowing when stillness is more productive than action, knowing when waiting is not avoidance, but intelligence. Creation operates this way. Night follows day. Rest follows work. Silence follows sound. Break the rhythm. And even good things become destructive. This is why constant productivity drains the soul. Why constant stimulation exhausts the nervous system. Why constant certainty makes faith brittle. Alignment restores rhythm. And rhythm restores humility. You stop believing you must control outcomes. To be safe, you trust sequence. First stability, then movement. First coherence, then expansion. This is how growth becomes sustainable. And here's something that surprises many people. As alignment deepens, your need to explain yourself diminishes. You stop justifying rest. Stop defending boundaries. Stop arguing for your pace. Because coherence doesn't need permission. It carries its own authority. This is not arrogance. It is groundedness. And groundedness changes how others experience you. Your words land more clearly. Your presence feels less demanding. Your silence feels less awkward. Because you are no longer leaking urgency. Urgency pressures others. Coherence invites them. This is how alignment becomes leadership, without intention. People trust what feels stable, and stability is rare. This is why sacred geometry was never meant to stay in diagrams or symbols. It was meant to be lived. Proportion in how you speak. Balance in how you work. Symmetry in how you give and receive. Not perfection. Relationship. And relationship requires awareness. You begin to see how often misalignment comes from trying to be everywhere at once. Mentally in the future. Emotionally in the past. Physically in the present. But barely. Alignment gathers you back. It brings attention home. And when attention returns home, you stop fragmenting your energy. This is when fatigue eases. Not because you sleep more, but because you stop scattering yourself. This is also when gratitude stops feeling forced. You don't practice it. You notice it. Because attention, when stabilized, naturally recognizes what is sufficient. This is why contentment is not complacency. It is clarity. Clarity about what matters. Clarity about what can wait. Clarity about what was never necessary. And this clarity reaches into your faith in a quiet, steady way. You stop demanding answers on your timeline. Stop interpreting silence as absence. Stop equating struggle with failure. You realize something deeply reassuring. God does not rush, and neither does creation. Pressure comes from misalignment, not from truth. Truth unfolds. It reveals itself when conditions allow. This is why faith matures, not through intensity, but through patience. Patience is alignment with time, and time is one of the most sacred patterns of all. You cannot compress it without consequences. You cannot escape it without distortion, but you can cooperate with it. And cooperation feels like peace. This is the final shift. You stop trying to master life and begin to participate in it. Participation requires humility. Humility is not weakness. It is accuracy. Accurate assessment of capacity, accurate respect for rhythm, accurate alignment with design, and design, once honored, returns favor with stability. This is why alignment feels like grace. Not earned, not forced, received. And when you receive it, life doesn't become smaller. It becomes spacious. You breathe deeper. You listen longer. You move with intention. You become less impressive and more real. And real is what lasts. And in that spaciousness, something else begins to emerge. A quiet courage that doesn't need to announce itself. You stop needing certainty before taking the next step. You stop waiting for perfect clarity before moving forward. You trust that alignment will correct you as you go. This is not recklessness. It is confidence rooted in coherence. When your inner structure is stable, mistakes do not threaten your identity. They become feedback, not failure. This is how growth actually works. Not by avoiding error, but by remaining aligned enough to adjust without collapse. This is why aligned people recover faster. They don't spiral. They recalibrate. They notice tension early. They return to rhythm quickly. And rhythm, once restored, carries them forward again. This is the difference between resilience and resistance. Resistance fights reality. Resilience adapts to it. Alignment builds resilience, and resilience allows life to teach without breaking you. This is also where fear finally loses its authority, not because fear disappears, but because it is no longer in charge. Fear becomes information, not a command. It alerts without overwhelming. It warns without controlling, because the system receiving it is stable. This is why alignment restores agency. You are no longer dragged by reactions. You respond with choice, choice grounded in awareness. Awareness grounded in the body grounded in rhythm. Everything returns to order. And when order returns, you begin to notice how much suffering was never required, how much struggle came from pushing, when listening would have sufficed, how much confusion came from speed, when patience would have clarified. This realization does not bring regret. It brings forgiveness. Forgiveness for yourself. Forgiveness for seasons lived out of alignment, because you didn't know another way. Alignment is compassionate. It does not shame the past. It integrates it. This is why aligned faith feels merciful, not permissive, but understanding. Understanding that growth takes time, that learning requires error, that remembering is a process. This compassion changes how you see others too. You stop labeling people as lazy, weak, or uncommitted. You see misalignment. You see exhaustion. You see systems under strain. And this seeing softens judgment. Not because truth disappears, but because context appears. Context restores humanity. This is why alignment quietly repairs communities, not through ideology, but through presence. A present person listens differently, responds differently, creates safety without trying, and safety allows honesty. Honesty allows healing. This is how order spreads, not by force. By example, this is why the most influential people in history were not always the loudest. They were the most coherent. Their words carried weight, because their presence carried stability. People trusted them, because their system did not contradict itself. This is integrity, not moral perfection, but internal consistency. Integrity is alignment made visible, and integrity is magnetic. It draws people toward clarity, without demanding agreement. This is why alignment ultimately becomes service, not service through exhaustion, but service through steadiness. You give without depleting yourself. You support without losing center. You contribute without abandoning rhythm. This is sustainable goodness, and sustainability is a spiritual virtue, rarely named, but deeply needed. Because good intentions without structure burn out. Alignment gives goodness a container, a shape, a rhythm. This is the deeper meaning behind sacred geometry. not symbols to decode, but principles to live by. Balance, proportion, relationship. When these are honored, life flows. When they are ignored, life resists, not as punishment, but as correction. And correction, when understood, is kindness. This is where the story circles back to its beginning. That quiet sense you once felt, that something was off. It was never an accusation. It was an invitation to return to order, to remember rhythm, to inhabit your design. And when you accept that invitation, life does not become silent. It becomes clear. Clear enough to hear guidance, clear enough to feel peace, clear enough to trust the next step, without seeing the entire path. This is alignment, not an ending, a way of being. And once you live from this place, you realize something quietly freeing. You were never lost. You were just out of rhythm. And rhythm, once remembered, always returns you home. All right, I'm going to finish everything now in one continuous flow, and I will sharpen the ending so it lands emotionally, memorably, and quietly shocking, without breaking the soul Spire tone. From here on, there is no meta, no explanation. This is the final movement of the story. And now, here is the truth that most people never reach. Not because it is hidden, but because it is uncomfortable to accept. Alignment does not give you control. It takes it away. Not control over life, but control over how life must unfold. This is why alignment feels threatening at first. Because once coherence returns, you can no longer blame chaos for everything. You begin to see clearly where you were rushing, where you were forcing, where you were clinging. And clarity removes excuses. It also removes illusion. This is the moment where many people quietly turn back. Because alignment demands honesty. Honesty about limits. Honesty about pace. Honesty about what you are actually called to carry, and what you picked up out of fear. When structure returns, you can no longer pretend misalignment is destiny. You see the cost of ignoring rhythm. And you also see something else. Something deeply humbling. You realize how little effort was actually required to feel whole again. Not none, but far less than you imagine. This realization can feel almost painful, because it exposes how much energy was wasted, trying to become someone else, instead of inhabiting who you already were. This is where sacred geometry completes its role, not as a concept, but as a mirror. It shows you that creation does not strain to exist. Stars do not force balance. Planets do not hustle to stay in orbit. Nature does not apologize for resting. Order is not anxious. And if you were designed within that order, then anxiety was never your natural state. It was a response to living out of alignment for too long. This is the final shift. You stop asking, how do I fix my life? And start asking, how do I live in a way that does not fight truth? That question changes everything, because truth does not require intensity. It requires alignment. This is why the deepest spiritual maturity often looks unimpressive from the outside. It looks like slower movement, clear boundaries, quieter confidence, fewer explanations. It looks like someone who is no longer trying to prove that they are okay. They simply are. And here is the most unsettling revelation of all. The peace you were chasing was never something you needed to reach. It was something you needed to stop overriding. You were never disconnected from God. You were distracted from coherence. You were never spiritually empty. You were structurally exhausted. And exhaustion makes even truth feel distant. This is why alignment feels like returning home, rather than discovering something new. Because home is not a location. Home is coherence. When the body rests in rhythm, when the breath deepens naturally, when the nervous system feels safe enough to soften, faith stops feeling fragile. Prayer stops feeling heavy. Silence stops feeling empty. And in that silence, something unmistakable happens. You realize God was never absent. You were just too tense to notice. Not because he was quiet, but because you were bracing. This is the shock most people don't expect. Alignment doesn't bring you closer to God. It removes what was blocking your awareness of him. And what blocked it was never sin in the way you were taught. It was constant inner resistance. Resistance to stillness. Resistance to limitation. Resistance to rhythm. Once resistance softens, presence becomes obvious. Not dramatic. Obvious. Like realizing the ground was always beneath your feet. This is why sacred geometry matters. Not because shapes are holy, but because they remind us that creation is coherent. And you are not separate from that coherence. You are an expression of it, which means your life was never meant to feel like a constant emergency. It was meant to unfold with timing, with proportion, with rest. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes honest. You still face loss. You still face uncertainty. You still face decisions that stretch you, but you no longer face them fragmented. You face them whole, and wholeness is strength that does not shout. It endures. This is the final truth. The cosmic key was never hidden knowledge. It was alignment. And alignment was never mystical power. It was remembering how to live, without fighting your own design. If something in you feels quieter now, if your breath feels a little deeper, if the noise inside you softened without effort, that is not imagination. That is coherence returning. And if this journey stirred something real in you, support it. Like this video. Share it with someone who feels overwhelmed but can't explain why. Subscribe to the Soul Spire so we can continue creating reflections like this. Not to impress you, not to rush you, but to walk with you back toward clarity. Explore the previous Soul Spire videos. They are not separate messages. They are steps in the same ascent. And if you believe the world needs less noise and more alignment, less urgency, and more truth, share this message. Because when even one person returns to coherence, the world becomes slightly more stable, and that matters more than you know. You were never broken. You were just out of rhythm, and rhythm, once remembered, always leads you home.